Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jorvik and welcome back to episode 7 of my podcast show, Fandom Friendly, where we talk about all things fandom. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about a few big things. Mostly we're going to be talking about like my review for Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man animated series that was on Disney Plus over January and February, as well as talking about Captain America Brave New World, which at this point of filming this has been out for a little over a week. I went and saw it twice. I really kind of want my emotions and like thoughts on it really sink in before I just do a review on it, because we'll get into it, but I do feel like there is a lot that needs to be discussed about this film, both good and bad, so stick around for that. But to start this off, I want to talk about a few trailers that has come out in the last few weeks. Besides Fantastic Four, we had a new trailer for the new Jurassic World movie, Rebirth, and my thoughts on it are pretty lukewarm, I think. I didn't see the last two Jurassic World movies. I've only seen Jurassic World. I hadn't seen Fallen Kingdom or what was the last one called? Dominion, I think. So I don't know. It looks cool. Like it looks different enough. Like it does look like a fresh start. In essence, it is a rebirth of the franchise, but it is also kind of interesting that this is acting like a sort of reboot, even though it's obviously still in the same continuity. I think I saw that it was supposed to be like 3 years or so after Dominion, which in reality, Dominion was only a couple years ago. So having like this fresh reboot is already kind of like crazy, I think. But yeah, I think the main thing about it is um, we're getting new dinosaurs, like we have been getting in like all of these movies. Because I do know like what happens in Fallen Kingdom and Dominion, but this new one looks like not even a dinosaur. Like it's kind of crazy. It's of a quadruped, which I think is actually kind of cool. Um, but like I saw that it was supposed to be a mix between a xenomorph and a rancor, and I've seen some concept art of it, and I think it does look pretty interesting, to say the least. But other than that, I mean, I don't really have a lot to say about it. But that movie does come out in July. July is gonna be a very stacked month. I talked about it in my Fantastic Four trailer review. That we have Superman on July 11th. We have Fantastic Four on the 25th, I believe. And I think Jurassic World comes out in between those. But moving on, we got a new full trailer for How to Train Your Dragon. I also did a trailer reaction to this a few months ago with when the teaser was released. And I mentioned it in that video that I am generally excited for this film. I've never really been a fan of remakes, especially when it comes from animated movies to live action, because I feel like, as someone who really likes animation, I do feel like it just makes like Disney and Universal now, like these studios doing these animation to live action remakes really just kind of paints the picture that animation is not really held to the same standard as live action. Does that make sense? I mean, look at when Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse came out, the first one. That movie did not really do that well, like on paper, when it comes to box office success. The second one, maybe, because by then the first one had really great traction, but like that movie's incredible. Animation's incredible. Same thing with the How to Train Your Dragon films. Those movies are really, really good. And I think they're one of the few trilogies that get better as they go. Seeing more in this trailer, it does look like a full, just shot for shot remake. And that's something that I'm really on the fence about. Because at least with the Disney live action stuff, like, yeah, for the most part, I would say that's like 80% shot for shot. But there are still a lot of those films that are kind of done differently. I just really hope that the that some of the main sequences are different. You know what I mean? Because then it's like, why would I watch the live action when I have the original just fine? I don't know, but that movie comes out in June. I'll still go and see it. Obviously, I'll definitely go see that in IMAX. It's one of those films that I think you have to see in IMAX. But other than that, I mean, the cast looks great. I have no gripes about the cast. Gerard Butler returning as Stoic from the original films, I think, is a nice touch. I don't know if there are any other returning characters or voice actors coming into live action. If you know that, let me know. Moving on, there have been a couple Daredevil trailers come out in the last couple weeks because that series comes out at the time of this recording next week. So hopefully in the next episode I'll do my review for the first two episodes. But it looks great. I'm really excited for this series. I really liked the Netflix series. Um, I think season three, I think like half of season two is really good, and like season three, I think is all pretty much good. And this being a sort of spiritual successor to those original three seasons. Obviously, now Marvel's come out and saying that now those are canon, but it could be one of those things where they do take place in another universe technically, but the history is still kind of the same, even though like when you go and watch those, they don't reference anything that happens in the movies. I don't know. It's kind of confusing, but if you're just like a casual watcher, but for us nerds who love this shit, then it's yeah, it's good to see Kingpin back. It looks like he has been actually elected mayor since we last saw him in Echo a little over a year ago when he decided to run for mayor. Now, we don't know when this show is supposed to take place. Seemingly, it takes place, I want to say, between 2025 and 2027. And I say that because She Hulk takes place in 25, I believe, where we kind of last, besides Echo, because that was more of a flashback, but that's where we last saw Matt kind of in the present day, in his yellow and red suit. So again, I will be curious to see where this kind of falls because I want to say that since Echo technically takes place is like a sequel sort of to Hawkeye, which takes place in at Christmas of 2024. It takes place a few weeks after that, so it would be 2025. And then I don't know how New York City's mayoral races work, but it could be the end of 2025 or the beginning of 2026. Again, I only say that because we do know that Captain America takes place in 2027. Specifically, it takes place in spring 2027, and we'll talk about that later. We also got a trailer, and I thought this was interesting. We also got a trailer for, again, this was a couple weeks ago, for Until Dawn, which, if you don't know, is a video game series. Well, actually, no, it's just one game. Very interesting. I don't want to like really spoil the story of that game because it is like kind of cool. It's one of those games that you play through and your choices like matter, and there's like a couple different endings, that type of thing. And from what I saw of this trailer, I think they have like the location correct and they have like half of the story there. I am really curious if they're gonna kind of do like the second half of Until Dawn. Again, if you've played those games or that game, you know what I'm talking about. If not, again, I don't really want to spoil it. But like I didn't really see that much in the trailer, at least the one that I saw. If I missed something, please let me know. It looks interesting. I will probably just wait the 2 weeks after it comes out in theaters to watch it on streaming because that seems to be how the movie life cycle goes these days. We also got a new trailer for a surprising return to a horror franchise. Speaking of which, we also got another trailer for um, Final Destination Bloodlines, which I also think is interesting. The last Final Destination movie, I believe, was 2010, 2011. So nigh 15 years since we saw an entry in this franchise, which honestly I think is probably the perfect amount of time to reboot or to kind of make a sequel. If you're not familiar with the Final Destination series, first of all, go watch those. I do think those are some of the better horror films. No, I mean, well, they're not like good, but like they're just kind of like a fun. They're like a good bad. I do find them mildly entertaining. I do think there's a lot of creative kills within that franchise, but basically the premise is that there is a group of characters and they're doing, and each movie is different. I think for people in my age group, we mostly remember, and it's like a meme at this point, but we mostly remember Final Destination 2, where it's a highway accident where there is a truck hauling like logs, like tree logs, and one of the chains breaks and like the logs fall off the trailer and causes this horrendous explosion or accident on the interstate, and it kills a bunch of people, unalives a bunch of people. I hate that. But yeah, so I think that one is, I think is what in my generation really like focused on, is that, and it doesn't bother me when I'm driving on the interstate, but I do see a lot of memes now where people are like, they'll take a picture of like a log truck and they're like, getting around this. Yeah, so back to Bloodlines. Look, it's an interesting concept. I think from what I gathered from the trailer, it's pretty much going to be maybe kids of previous characters who this like kind of generational curse is following. I'm very interested to see like how that resolves and how it ultimately connects to the other movies, because spoiler for the last one, again 15 years old, Final Destination 5 ends with again spoiler, uh, ends with the beginning of Final Destination 1. That makes sense. And it's actually like pretty insane. Like, and that was an insane plot twist. Like, if you saw that in theaters, you were like, whoa. So again, I would be really interested to see how they connect to the others, if at all. But it seems like that it does. That's about it. For like trailers that I like care about and watched. We did see a new trailer for the new Mission Impossible movie. Um, Looks great. I mean, visually, the cinematography looks really good. I've actually really like that movie franchise, and I think it's one of the last few like action movie franchise, like classic action movie franchises. You know what I mean? But this was actually supposed to come out last year, because I think the last one, it was Dead Reckoning Part One, and then this was supposed to be Dead Reckoning Part Two, and they were supposed to come out a year apart, but they got delayed, which is fine. So now that's coming out later this year, and it's the conclusion to, uh, well, one, the overall story, I guess, and two, to the last movie. While the subtitle is Final Reckoning, it is unclear, at least to my knowledge, if this will be the last Mission Impossible movie. I doubt it. I mean, it is a pretty popular franchise. I mean, honestly, I think you could do a TV show. And if you don't know, the original Mission Impossible was a TV show, I think back in like the 60s or 70s, something like that. And then obviously in the 90s, it was brought to the film, to be a movie. But I think it would be cool if they wanted to continue this franchise to do a TV show. I mean, honestly, why not, right? That way Tom Cruise can still be a producer on it and maybe do a couple cameos if he wanted to. I don't think he's a TV guy. I think he's above that now, but it would be pretty interesting. All right, and that's it for trailers. Let me know if there are any other trailers that you saw in the past couple of weeks that you are into. Let me know if you saw any of the trailers that I talked about. What do you think about them? What are you excited for? Discuss. All right, so let's get into the meat and bones of this episode. And first up, we're going to be talking about Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Right off the bat, I really enjoyed this show. Okay, I know I've said it in previous videos. I am a Marvel shill, and honestly, I wish Marvel would pay me or Disney would pay me to talk good about their content. Um, but we'll discuss it in a different video. But obviously, nothing is 10 out of 10. Okay, I'm not that naive about it. There's a lot of controversy surrounding this show. One, the main voice actor for Peter was afraid that the show is too woke, and honestly, this whole like anti woke nonsense is so stupid. I've talked about it before in another episode of Fandom Friendly when we were talking about the Alkalite, but it's just, it's so dumb. Like, obviously, so we learn before we really dive into it, we from the surface we learn that this is kind of like a 616 adjacent timeline. Um, because it takes place right around when we meet our Peter in the main 616 universe. Civil War. They do talk about Civil War in this, which I think is pretty cool. They talk about the Sokovia Accords, and like continue that thread, which I think is pretty interesting. But obviously, one of the big differences between this world or this timeline and the main 616 timeline is that Norman Osborn, Doc Ock, and well, Matt Gargan uh, is in the main timeline technically. But Tombstone, like all of these other like Spider-Man villains are in this universe. And of course, Norman Osborn is black in this show, and honestly, who cares? It's a different universe. If you want Willem Dafoe, Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, go watch those movies. This show is not for you. I think he's great. I really do. Like over the course of the show, and they have talked about that the way that this show ends, I don't know, without getting into spoilers just yet, the way that the show ends, it does have like that Lord of the Rings type of ending where each scene in like the last like 5 minutes sets up like eight different threads. But I think they already had like 3 seasons planned out. So everything is really gonna like be coming together over the course of season 2 and then obviously into season 3. But again, a lot of threads set up in this universe. I really like the dynamic between Peter and Nico, who, interesting enough, is a character from the Runaways. And I thought when they initially announced the show and they mentioned that Nico was going to be like a side character, I thought that was really interesting because Nico and Peter is not really like a pairing that I would generally put together. Because I just associate her so much with the Runaways, and even that, the Runaways take place in like Los Angeles, like on the opposite coast, so sometimes they're not even in the same like city. But I feel like it opens the door to bring Nico and the rest of the Runaways into 616 main universe, because technically speaking, just a side tangent here. We did have the Runaway show, which I thought was generally pretty good, and we also had Cloak and Dagger, which I also thought was, it was all right. I liked it. It's been a while since I've watched those. Maybe if I watch them again, my opinions will change. But those are technically in the MCU, and it would be very cool if in Secret Wars or Doomsday or even like a Young Avengers or like another animated project, they bring those characters in and make them part, just in the same realm as they did with the Netflix properties, bring those into the 616 universe. Anyways, I digress. I really liked Nico in this. We got a hint of her magic, which she could do in the comics. And I think over the course of like season 2 and season 3, she'll like fully dive into her magical properties. And of course, that opens the door for Doctor Strange to come back into this show. Because it is interesting. I think he was like one of the only Avengers to show up in this. We did get a cameo from Iron Man. Most interesting, I think, is how we open the show, because it is a like branch reality of Main 616. When we see Doctor Strange fighting this Venom-like character, this Clintar, this symbiote, right? We're really confused on what's going on, and the way that they talk about, or that he, and one of the first lines Doctor Strange says is like, "Oh, we're not supposed to be here." So initially watching this, it made me think that, oh, he's from a different reality. He accidentally crossed into this one, and so on and so on. But obviously, when we get to the end of the show, we see what actually happens, which I think, honestly, brilliant writing. But we see how Peter one got bitten by the spider, and that's something that we actually haven't seen in um, the main 616. We don't know how Peter got his powers. We kind of skipped over his origin in the live action movies. And, for better or for worse, it is kind of like, where did that spider come from? Was it a spider from the future? Are we going to kind of see this plot line kind of come back in Secret Wars, maybe. I don't know. But it is pretty interesting, I think. Most of the show is kind of like a villain of the week type of thing. It is pretty interesting that episode two, Norman Osborn figures out that, or catches Peter becoming Spider-Man, and just like knows his identity, and then he becomes like this Tony Stark father figure to Peter, creating him different suits, which are really cool. They're reference to the comics, and, and kind of being his man in the chair as Peter is fighting crime. I thought that was a very interesting dynamic that we don't see a lot, pretty much ever. Norman has always been like an antagonist towards Peter, well, Spider Man mostly. And then when eventually Harry finds out about Peter's identity as Spider Man, he kind of becomes Peter's guy in the chair, which I appreciate, kind of filling in for Ned, which we do know exists in this universe because he is name dropped at the end of the season. We also get a B plot with Lonnie Lincoln, who was Tombstone in the comics. Obviously, he's not Tombstone yet, but he starts to becoming Tombstone over the course of this first season. We see him go from being the star quarterback of the high school that they go to getting involved with a gang, and then being involved with a gang war with the Scorpions, which is led by Matt Gargan, the Scorpion, who is actually pretty vicious in this show. Like, I was unclear whether or not they would really like make this show more adult, because you got to think that a lot of the reason why they do these animated shows are for kids. It's just to get them into these characters. And I mean, it's been happening for decades. That's why there's a new like TMNT TV show like every 5 years, is because they're like, oh, let's get a new, same thing with Scooby Doo. It's the same principle. The first time that Peter fights Scorpion, because he gets his suit, it's like it's all technology. Scorpion does, and we'll talk about the villains later and like how that happens. But the first fight that they have is brutal. I mean, Peter gets his butt kicked, and to the point where Peter gets like stabbed through like the shoulder with, or his chest with, Scorpion Stinger, which is like, for an animated kid show, is pretty visceral, I think. It comes back later too in the final couple episodes where they finally beat Scorpion. Like the first time that Peter sees him, um, after that fight, he has like a panic attack, and it really showcases, like, even as heroes. I mean, Peter is a kid. When you go through a trauma like that, even though Peter healed and all that, he's gonna have some PTSD from that, because I feel like if anyone gets stabbed through the chest and survives, you're gonna have a little bit of like hesitance. So for some of the villains, we did get Unicorn, who is like a super deep cut from the comics. I think they only have like maybe one or two appearances, but she is part of a Russian gang of criminals, and also on that team is Alexei, who is the Rhino. He doesn't become the Rhino in this season, but I'm sure they'll set him up to become Rhino, maybe in season 2 or season 3. But we also, part of that team is also Chameleon. And it's just really funny that we're getting these two characters specifically in this show, because like 3 months ago we had Craven the Hunter, which also had Chameleon and Rhino in it in antagonistic roles. So, I mean, pretty fresh in a lot of people's minds if they watch that movie. P.S. Don't watch that movie. It is not great. And then there was a fourth member, but I don't remember if she got powers or not. I think she was just kind of a throwaway character. And before, it was like, I think we went like a few episodes before we saw like who this person was, who was creating this technology and giving these weapons to these criminals. And at first, I thought it was the Tinkerer, which we did see a version of in Homecoming, because my mind was going to, okay, so if this is like a branch timeline, right after Civil War, which happens in this show as well, just like in the background, like it's mentioned. We do know that the Tinkerer was working with the Vulture in Homecoming, which does take place a couple months after Civil War. Vulture was not in this show. I think they purposely left him out. But I did think that the Tinkerer was um, the person making these weapons, and then I completely forgot that the concept art in the trailer showed Doc Ock. So obviously we get this universe's version of Otto Octavius, who is more comic accurate. He has like the green and yellow suit. He has the bowl cut, the thick glasses, the lab coat. But he's not Doc Ock yet. Um, we got a tease at the end where he's designing his arms. So he doesn't have the arms yet. He's just designing weapons for criminals. And it's pretty cool because we get to see Ross um, more designed like William Hurt's character, the William Hurt's version of Ross from Civil War, where he comes and arrests Otto in violation of the Sokovia Accord, so he gets thrown in jail, which is kind of cool that they're kind of connecting those threads. Another big thing I want to talk about is the suits. So we get a couple different versions of the suits that Peter wears. The first few like prototype suits, there's like Beetle. There is I can't remember the exact names of them, but they're all suits from the comics. And then they finally settle on a suit that resembles the Future Foundation's suit, and it's actually kind of cool because that's one of my favorite Spider-Man suits, and that was a suit that was given to him by Reed Richards when Peter joined Future Foundations, and that is the white and black suit, and that's the Fantastic Four were part of that. There were some other heroes involved in that. I'm not too well versed on that era of comics or exactly what the Future Foundation does, but we do know the Future Foundation does exist because they are going that the Future Foundation is going to be in the Fantastic Four film coming out in July. We'll get like a nod to that. I think that'd be pretty cool. But obviously, after the fight with Scorpion, the suit gets heavily damaged. Peter's like in the hospital at Oscorp. His blood gets taken, which crazy. So that's a plot that'll obviously come back at the end of the season and will definitely carry over into next season. And then Peter just kind of like freaks out and doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore. And then Harry's like, "Hey, look, I saw some of your designs. I went ahead and made this suit for you without my dad's permission. Here you go." And it's his classic red and blue suit, and it looks great. And so that's the suit that he has for the last couple episodes and obviously going forward. Before we talk about the finale, let's talk about the art style, because I do feel like it is definitely a choice, and I think a lot of people that at least I've seen have been relatively positive on it because it is reminiscent of comic book art, is a specifically comic book art from the 60s and 70s, the original when Peter Parker was created. At first it I think for me personally it took a couple episodes to really like get accustomed to it, and that's like with any animation or different style of animation. Sometimes it can be pretty jarring if it's just so different from what you've seen before. But other than that, I did the art style to really come around to me. I think it really kind of fits this universe and really kind of helps tell the story, because I really liked when an action would be happening here and this action would be happening here, and then it'll split like comic book panels. And no other movie has really done that, except for Ang Lee's Hulk movie from 2003. I think they did it too much in that film. They did a little bit of it in The Incredible Hulk, and I'm sure they did it in Watchmen, maybe, but it's still a style that's not really utilized a lot. One plot point that I haven't mentioned yet is so the reason why Peter gets involved with Norman in the first place is because we get in the second episode, or I think it's the end of the first episode, we get a recreation of Peter's introductory scene from the movie Civil War, where he's walking up the stairs and he walks in and we meet Tony Stark with May, and then like that whole scene happens, right? Well, in this universe, it's Norman instead of Tony Stark. And Norman is personally recruiting Peter to be part of this like internship program with young brilliant minds, basically work on projects for Oscorp and all that kind of stuff. Typical Spider-Man Peter Parker stuff. We do meet a couple characters here. We do meet I think her name was Janine, who we find out is working. Spoiler again. I'm really gonna get into spoilers here, so if you really haven't watched the show, then turn away, I guess. But if you don't care, then continue on. So there's a character named Janine who we find out is working with Daredevil. And Daredevil is, we see in one episode, voiced by Charlie Cox, so it's pretty cool, and how he is investigating Norman Osborn, and he's using this other character, Janine, who is a hero called Finesse, and then they tease that they're still working together at the end of the final episode. So we'll see her and Daredevil again in season 2, most definitely. We do get a character from Wakanda, and I think it's an interesting choice, and here's why. I haven't really seen people talk about this, and you could chalk it up to it being just because it's a different universe. Because this universe parallels so much with the 616 main universe, technically Wakanda would still be an isolated country, right? It wouldn't send. I mean, obviously they had the war dogs are out there in the world, being like sleeper agents essentially. But having someone being like, oh, I'm from Wakanda, I'm a genius, blah, blah, blah. If this takes place right after Civil War, Black Panther takes place right after Civil War, the film. And then at the end of that film is when T'Challa decides to open up Wakanda to the world. To the point where, like, they're sharing resources a little bit, and, there are people, he has outreach centers, in various places in the world. Now, you could chalk it up to it being timeline stuff. So, because, again, being a different universe, that type of thing. But also, Homecoming takes place a couple months after Civil War. And then this takes place, like, during Civil War. Does that make sense? I don't know. I think it's just a small nitpicky thing, but I do like her character. I think she's pretty fun. And then we get a surprise character, Amadeus Cho, who in the comics is totally awesome Hulk. Doesn't Hulk out in this, obviously. And it's actually interesting because that he's in this show, because Amadeus Cho was actually supposed to appear in Captain America Brave New World, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So I do think it's interesting that he shows up in this show. He's kind of a dickhead, I'm gonna be honest. He's a very like he's like the jock of like a scientist. You know what I mean? Like he's like, he goes, oh, I'm the best, you guys suck. I'm the best. That's Amadeus Cho. We don't really see him a lot, or really the other characters in the show. Just mostly them reacting to Peter disappearing a lot, which is typical in a Spider-Man show or movie, and just overall questioning what Peter is even doing there, because they don't see him do anything in the show. Technically, I mean, honestly, neither do we. Another thing that I like is like, so all these characters, there's only 4 of them that are in this internship program. They get involved with some scientist. One of them is a villain known as the Wizard. In the comics, he's also kind of a dickhead in this. Maybe he'll become the Wizard in season 2 or season 3. I think that would be really interesting. But Peter specifically gets paired with one Dr. Connors. Now, in this universe, Dr. Connors is a woman, which does not bother me because I'm not a sexist. In the little that we did see her in the show, does kind of warrant that she could potentially become the Lizard in this, because she is missing an arm. And there was one episode where they were bringing in a bunch of animals, including a lizard, and they specifically lingered on the lizard for a second to kind of foreshadow that she could be experimenting with lizard DNA, become the Lizard. I also think this ties back into the Rhino, because like Scorpion, Doc Ock, Unicorn, even Chameleon, he kind of has like he has this mask in this show. I don't think they're gonna do the Rhino gets a mech suit like they did in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. We all know how that worked out. So I think what they're going to do is actually make Rhino more of an animalistic character, like he's kind of portrayed in Kraven the Hunter. No, not kind of. He is portrayed like that in Kraven the Hunter. But in other Spider-Man media, he's also portrayed as being more animalistic. Or they could do a mix of both, where they do the classic Rhino, where you just see his like face and then like his whole body is like a cement block. I mean, they could do that. I have no idea. So let's get to like the D plot of this season, and that is what Norman Osborn is actually using all of these people's inventions for. So each student is given a task to create something and work with their mentors. And Peter, specifically with Dr. Connors, works on a power generator, energy, right, battery thing. And in the final episode, we learn that Norman um, is creating this, basically his own wormhole to travel and to take like Oscorp and humanity into space, which, and they mention the Chitauri invasion, so we know that that happens in this universe as well, and how all of these threats come from space, and how if we get into space, we could be a threat in the universe as well. And this is where Doctor Strange comes in. Now, at this point, we had seen Doctor Strange in the first episode. However, when he shows up in this episode, he has no idea what they're talking about because Norman confronts him about destroying the school, which was Midtown High, by the way, in the beginning. And he has no idea what he's talking about and has never like really been to Midtown or Queens or any of that. Norman activates this portal anyway. It opens a door to a random point in space where we presumably it is Clintar or somewhere around Clintar because a Venom-esque symbiote being comes through the doorway, and it's the same one that we saw at the beginning of the show. So naturally, chaos ensues. Doctor Strange starts fighting the monster. Peter suits up as Spider-Man. He begins fighting the monster as well. At one point, everyone escapes the land, so it's just Doctor Strange and Peter down in this like basement. And this is where it like is really cool. So Peter gets thrown through a wall and it goes into the lab where all the animals are kept. And one of the animals was a spider. And we saw in a previous scene that when they took Peter's blood, they injected it into that spider to try to recreate the DNA that created Spider-Man, to try to create their own spider army. So here's where it gets a little timey-wimey. Doctor Strange uses the time stone to fix something, and as he's creating a portal, the Venom being goes for the time stone, and it basically, instead of it being like a normal Doctor Strange portal, it becomes like green. And so when they jump into that, then we are at the beginning of the show where Doctor Strange is fighting the creature. So it's all one big circle. Because even at the beginning, we did see the spider come through and get stuck there and bite Peter. So that spider from the future falls into the portal, like we saw at the beginning, and there you go. It's an Ouroboros. It's crazy. So it's one of those things where like Peter creates himself. Like it's just the writing, the execution of it. I think was pretty cool, pretty nice. But because Doctor Strange was just accused of destroying the school, that's when he looks around, he says, "Oh, we are not supposed to be here," because he sees the sign of the school and he goes, "Oh, that's what they were just telling me about." And then here he is in the past, doing exactly what happened at the beginning. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like the show is just one big circle, and I wonder how that's going to play into the multiverse saga, because would that create a branch timeline? Or would it create an incursion? Probably not an incursion because it's not two universes colliding. But you would think that going back in time like that, because we haven't seen that version of time travel in the MCU, in any of the projects. We only, to our knowledge, time travel is only possible through the quantum realm, and only if you have certain technology to navigate the quantum realm. So in theory, you would think that Doctor Strange would have figured out that he could time travel with the time stone by creating a portal. I don't know, it's confusing. It's a new way to time travel in the MCU so far that we've seen, and I don't know how it works. I don't know how it follows the rest of the rules for how time and like absolute points and anchor being like how all that works. Maybe they'll explain it. Maybe it'll come back. It would be really interesting actually to see this version of Doctor Strange in live action in Secret Wars. To be like, no, I can time travel. Check this out. I learned this, and he shows that like, oh, it's way easier than traveling through the quantum realm. But again, that'll make time travel kind of a cop out. And that was my worry with the end of Endgame, because now that time travel exists, any problems can be solved, right? I don't know. Obviously, a lot of that is yet to be seen, so I guess it is whatever. All right, and that's pretty much it. I mean, like season one ends with just all of these teases for uh for season two. One thing I forgot to mention is during the final fight with Scorpion, Lonnie, because they're trying to break into an Oscorp truck that has all of Doc Ock's like weapons and like armor and stuff, and this canister uh, opens up, busts open, and exposes him to a gas, which makes him indestructible. And by the end, you see that his fingers are starting to turn white, because Tombstone in the comics is a indestructible, like ashen, like white ash, like figure. He's a big guy too, so we're gonna slowly see Tombstone come in to season two, and I am ready for that. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. I mean, nothing really too crazy. I mean, it's just a Spider-Man show, 8 episodes, nothing crazy, 8 or 9. Overall, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I'll probably give it like maybe a 7 out of 10. Um, on terms of my ranking, I don't really know yet. I don't even think I would really consider it part of like the main MCU ranking. But I don't know, since it does reference Civil War, like it is 616 adjacent. I mean, I'd probably put it at like an A, I think. But that's it for Spider Man. Let's move on to arguably the most controversial film so far this year, and that is Captain America Brave New World. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I really enjoyed this movie. And it's not because, look, it's not because I'm a Cap stan, okay? As someone who hates the American government, and I would proudly wear that badge of honor, I do really like the character Captain America. I mentioned it when the trailer first came out for this film last year. I mentioned in that I have been waiting for this movie for the better part of a decade. I don't have it in here, but over here I have a few of Sam's run as Captain America. I also have like a statue of Sam as Captain America that I got pre-Endgame. So I got that before the shield was even passed down to him. I'm probably one of like the 10 people in the world who was a fan of like Falcon the character. And in 2014 is in the comics when he became Captain America, when Steve passed it down to him. And also 2014 was the year he showed up in the MCU as Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And ever since then I was like, man, I hope they do what they do in the comics. And sure enough they did, and I'm proud of it. Now look, this film definitely not a 10 out of 10. There was a lot wrong with this film, but there was also a lot of good in this film. Like there's a pretty good mixed bag. And I think it's just because this film went through a lot of rewrites and went through a lot of reshoots, which reshoots is not uncommon in Hollywood. That happens with pretty much every Hollywood film. But to the point where some characters were taken out, some plots were rewritten, some things were re-edited. I mean, there is a lot, and I think it kind of suffers from like I think this film is the last film or project that was kind of not really in Marvel's bad era, but like kind of the end of like their issue era, their problem era. in terms of like CGI stuff, their whole thing with Kang and shifting to Doctor Doom and like reshuffling the whole like multiverse saga in a way to kind of fit this new narrative. Because I think going forward with Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, and any other projects. I mean, even look at Daredevil. Daredevil was there. That was originally going to be 18 episodes, and then they shot most of it and then scrapped all of it just to rewrite it and redo it. And hopefully that's for the best. I mean, that's yet to be seen. We'll talk about it next week. But it's still just like, during this kind of reshift phase, we'll kind of talk about it a little bit. And this part might be a little long because there is a lot to talk about. Let's just talk about like the broad strokes. Like, what was this film about? Without diving into spoilers, so this film basically picks up a thread from the Eternals, which is Tiamat sticking out of the ocean, finally being referenced. But we learn that Thunderbird. But we learn that Ross, Thaddeus Ross, is now president. And it's also interesting too, like the events of Secret Invasion weren't even mentioned in this, which I thought was interesting because it does seem like because in Secret Invasion it was President Ritson, and remember if you even remember that show, um, it ended with him doing like an open season on all like aliens on Earth, and that um, show ended with like Skrulls being massacred on like live television and like in front of crowds and stuff like that. None of that's brought up. We just know that Ross is president now. He was elected, and then like 6 months later, um, it's April 2027, and we know that because Sam and Joaquin and Isaiah Bradley get invited to the White House, which we saw in the trailer. And there's actually a date on that invitation dated April, I think it's like April 17th or like April 27th or something like that, but it's 2027. So it's spring 2027. We got a definitive date for this film. We learn, so Sam and Joaquin, as Cap and the new Falcon, are sent to Mexico to intercept the Serpent Society, which we finally get in the MCU, and they're just like a paramilitary group, which is fine. But in the comics, the Serpent Society is like actual, like ridiculous like costumes. Like they are people that they're named Sidewinder, they're named Adder, they're named Boa, they're named Constrictor, they're named um, Cobra. Like they're all snake themed. And in a previous version of this film, there was a character Sidewinder, which we do get in this film. There was also a character Copperhead, and they were more comic booky. But of course, that was scrapped, and then they got Giancarlo Esposito um, to play Sidewinder, and he's just the leader of this paramilitary group. But anyway, so Sam goes in there. We get this really like nice fight scenes. I thought like most of the action in this I thought was really pretty well done. At least a lot of the hand to hand stuff. And then when we get later on to all the flying stuff over the Indian Ocean and like around Tiamat, I also thought that was really cool. The way a lot of that was done. But we'll get to that in a minute. So they go in, they find out that the Serpent Society, they are meeting this buyer. We don't know who this buyer is yet, but they have this canister of something. Um, Obviously, typical Cap Falcon fashion. They defeat the Serpent Society. They're able to get this canister, and then we discover that this canister is, and because of this mission, this successful mission to recover this, that's why Sam, Joaquin, and Isaiah Bradley, returning from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, are invited to the White House for this like summit between India, the U.S., France, and Japan. And what's really interesting about that is that France was also a nation that was involved in Wakanda Forever because they were also after vibranium. Remember, they're the ones who attacked one of the Wakandan like outpost research facilities to get vibranium, and then they marched them all those soldiers in to like that hearing, like that France. But we find out that Celestial Island, as it's called now, Tiamat, um, is like mining operations have been set up in like the skull and like all this stuff, and that's where they discovered adamantium. Now, I really wish we actually would have saw these mining operations because they're only mentioned, but we never actually saw the inside of Tiamat, which I think was a really big missed opportunity. But anyways, Japan is the one who mined adamantium first. But Ross wants to, like, the whole plot of the movie is that Ross wants to basically unite these nations who lay claim over Tiamat, because we don't know exactly where it is in the Indian Ocean, but like it makes sense that India would go after it. I mean, realistically, in real life, it would probably be China, not Japan, but Disney needs to make money in China, so it's Japan in the film. But anyways, so like we saw in the trailer, this is the same summit where um, there are a few supercell agents in there, including Isaiah, that try to assassinate the president, or at least try to disrupt the peace, which kind of kicks into Act Two, which is kind of discovering this whole conspiracy on who framed Isaiah, or who is mind controlling Isaiah, and like four other officer, like military personnel, at the summit, as well as Ross trying to repair relations with Japan, because Japan, like India and France, were like, hey, look, we're still on board, but Japan isn't. If you guys get Japan on board, then we'll sign this treaty essentially, and then we can go from there. So that's kind of like the main plot of the movie. We do get the main villain of this is the leader, and I'm sure if you guys, if you're watching this, you probably have watched other breakdowns of this. The leader was supposed to look different. I actually kind of like this look, and I really wish that they would have kept him in shadows for most of the film, because like the first times you see him, he is in shadows, and his eyes glow green, and it gives him this really creepy, like sinister effect, and I think it that really works out, like personally. And then when you first see him, you see that he is severely mutated, which is fine. I don't hate the look. Okay, I do think it's a little jarring at first, and I think the main reason why they made him more grotesque is because they didn't want to have the same thing that they had with Modoc, with Darren Cross, like just smooth baby face and Modoc. Because it is hard to do that. I think if they had more time, they could. Because originally, I think he was just going to have like a normal, just tall head with like hair and like a mustache, or, like he does in the comics. Or at least one version of him in the comics is. But here they make him more grotesque, and I think it sort of works. But again, I think a lot of that was done in reshoots. So Sam and Joaquin learn of this secret base in Virginia called Echo One, and Echo One is from the comics as well. And so they go there, and that's where they discover the leader. And then we learn that Samuel Stearns has. I'm gonna start getting into spoilers now. I think just in general. Actually, no. Before I get into spoilers, because this is where spoilers are gonna start to happen. My overall thought on the film is I did enjoy it. I do think a lot of the action was really great. There were some spotty CGI spots, but I think that's just because it was reshoot stuff. And I mean, I don't know. It looks, there's one scene in particular, I'll talk about it in spoilers, that does look, I think, pretty bad. I'm gonna be honest. I think it's probably the worst CG shot of the. But again, a lot of the action great. A lot of the flying sequences really, really great. We do know Red Hulk is in this, so that's not a spoiler. Talking about that whole Red Hulk fight, I think also really great until the end, which we'll talk about in spoilers. But other than that, I mean, I think there's just I think that fight, just seeing a Hulk being like savage again, I think is just really refreshing. From we really haven't seen that since like, so I do like that aspect. Really quickly, Harrison Ford I think did great. It is kind of jarring because you feel like that Harrison Ford is the type of guy who really wouldn't want to be involved in another franchise like after he did Star Wars, like The Force Awakens and all that. But him kind of coming in and filling in for Ross, I think he did really great. The way that Harrison Ford acts, and because he's so old, he has that kind of gruffiness. Um, but he does do just a really, really great job. Like, there's some scenes where he needs to be soft, there's some scenes where he needs to be angry. He just has a full range of like a spectrum of acting that he does in this film, and it's all just it is so good, honestly. Same thing with Anthony Mackie. I really like Anthony Mackie as Sam. I think just fits really well. Same thing with Daniel Torres as Joaquin. Their chemistry I think is really great, and it really carries over from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. If you did watch that show, if you haven't, I highly recommend go watch that show, especially before Thunderbolts, because you're probably wondering who that other guy with the shield is, John Walker. Go watch the show. We also get a surprising cameo in this. It wasn't surprising for me. I kind of knew it would happen. There is one cameo that I thought would happen that didn't happen, which I thought was interesting. We'll talk about in spoilers. But other than that, really, really great stuff. There's one character I want to talk about before we go into spoilers. I mentioned it in the trailer reaction, last year. And that's the character Ruth Bassaroth, who is Saber or Sabra in the comics. Who is she was in the comics? She was a member of the Israeli IDF, which in the real world, pretty hot topic right now. I mean, honestly, Israel needs to be taken down a peg. I think for killing innocent people. I don't care what you think about that. That's what happened. So naturally, they try to stray away from that comic history for her. They do mention that she is from Israel, so they do kind of keep that, but they change her backstory to be that she was trained as a widow. So she's from the Red Room, and she's part of the group that Natasha and Yelena liberated, and which is fine. And I do think her character didn't really do a lot for me because I think it's just part of the rewrite thing about it, right? Is that she, I believe, had a bigger part in the film. And because of just the controversy around her and because a lot of just rewrites like separate from the controversy around her, she was probably I think she was written out of a lot of it. We really only see one action scene from her, and that is when she infiltrates. By the way, her character is um, Ross's like chief of security or something, and so she has pretty high clearance. So she knew that Sam and Joaquin were at Echo One. So she goes there, and later on we actually see her in like this black jacket, and underneath she has body armor underneath that's like white and blue. The colors of the Israeli flag. But again, I do think her character was just really downplayed. I mean, like she shows up. A sequence that I thought was the end of the movie and not the middle of the movie was the sequence over the Indian Ocean. She shows up with Sam and Joaquin there, but she does nothing. Like she can't go out and fight over the water. You know what I mean? So she's just kind of like there, and I really think her character suffers for it. And it's something against the actress. It's just the circumstances of her character and real world politics and the controversy surrounding it, I think, is what really pushed her character to a much lower tier than what it initially was. Do you know you know what I mean? So let's get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film, spoiler warning, but I feel like if you're watching this, you probably have seen the film. So, but whatever, carry on at your own risk. So let's start with the main. Let's see, what do I even start with? Let's just start with the cameo because it is. We'll start with the cameo and the ending, I think. So we get a cameo. So after the fight over the Indian Ocean, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute because I do really want to talk about that. Um, the main issue of the fight is that the leader, mind controls two Air Force pilots, and they go and they start attacking the Japanese fleet that's surrounding Tiamat, and we have the American fleet, naval fleet, that's like there as well. So there's this dogfight that happens between the Japanese and between the Americans, and it doesn't happen. But like if one of the ships gets sunk, then it's actually like war, right? So there's these the flying sequences. I think is really cool. Sam does just this really cool thing. We see a lot of cool utilizations with his wings, because we got to remember his wings and suit are made of vibranium, and vibranium can absorb energy. That's the whole point. We've known that since Captain America 1. So he goes, and so like all they're trying to stop the American pilots from destroying anything like the Japanese fleet. And so Joaquin stops a bomb, but because his suit's not made of vibranium, he gets severely injured and actually has to get medevaced out of that situation. And Sam, obviously takes down the pilots and stops the missiles from destroying the thing. And like the Japanese are like, "Oh, okay, cool. We realize uh, that something was going on with the Americans." But the whole time, Ross knows that the leader is the one causing all this, but he just is so like, because we learned that the leader has been in prison since the end of the Incredible Hulk. So at this point in the timeline, 16 years. We also learned that Sidewinder, Juan Carlos Esposito character, he worked for Shield, and his unit is the one who actually brought Samuel Stearns in at the end of that movie, which I think is a really nice kind of like thread detail that we didn't honestly need, which also raises more questions because did the Serpent Society get created from the fall of Shield? Were they also part of Hydra? I don't know. I have so many questions about that kind of backdoor stuff. We know that the way that the leader's powers works is that he can predict probability, which is a little bit different from what he can do in the comics. In the comics, he can like actually mind control, but in this, he mind controls through like light flashes and like music cues. But the whole probability thing comes back later. But he has basically, throughout the years of the MCU in the background, is how Ross, like, basically, he paved the way for Ross to become president. Obviously, there's tons of theory videos out there. New Rockstars does a good, like, and so does Screen Crust. They do a good kind of like really deep dive into like how the leader could have fit into all of the background of the MCU the last 15 years. So yeah, so it is pretty interesting. We also learned that because of Ross's heart condition, which we do learn about in Civil War, he talks about having a triple bypass, like having a heart attack. That he's been taking these pills, and these pills have been laced with radiation that have been dormant in his bloodstream, and that's what causes him to become Red Hulk, and he has to get really angry for that, and that almost happens during the Indian Ocean battle. And Harrison Ford's acting in this is kind of crazy, seeing an 83-year-old man like act like this, where the leader, after breaking out of Echo One facility, he's just out and loose, and he contacts the president. He's talking to him and like trying to get him to, you know, Hulk out on the battle carrier, and essentially destroy not only the American ships but potentially the Japanese ships as well. But Ross fights it, doesn't Hulk out, while Sam and Joaquin are trying to de-escalate the situation in this whole kind of like second act sequence, right? So, anyways, Joaquin gets too close. Like I mentioned earlier, he gets too close to a rocket. Has to get medevac out. So back in DC, Joaquin is like in critical condition. He's being worked on. He's in like the ICU basically. He's being operated on, and Bucky shows up. So this is the cameo that I knew Bucky would show up in this film. I just didn't know how or where. But it was a nice surprise to see Bucky in this. And it's a scene that's basically recreating the scene from Winter Soldier when Nick Fury was shot, and uh, Steve and Nat are there, and they're trying to like figure out what's going on, if he's gonna live or not. And I think the only reason for this scene was for the people who didn't watch the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I say that because they discuss like Sam was like, why did Steve chose me? Like, why did he choose me to become Captain America? And like they have like this little talk, and Bucky's like, look, you know, if he was, wrong about you, then he did that same thing. If he was wrong about you, he was wrong about me. that type of whole thing. And that's a conversation that was a big plot point in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So, for the people who didn't watch that show, this was just kind of like a quick recap of that whole premise of that show in the first place. You know what I mean? And so I do feel like that this was a weak point in the movie because it's like you're rehashing like old lines and old like character growth, character development that we have already seen. Now I get it. Most people who are casual Marvel fans probably don't watch the Disney Plus show, which is fine. But I feel like this movie specifically is like you have to be a Marvel fan to really like enjoy this movie and really understand this movie. Not only because it brings back plot points from 2008 from or 10 or whenever 9 whenever the Incredible Hulk came out. Like it's bringing back those characters. Betty shows up in this. Albeit she had no reason to be in this. I'm going to be honest. I wish she had a bigger role, honestly. Kind of gripe with this film. And again, I think a lot of that was because of reshoots, because I think she was supposed to show up in a funeral scene, and that was probably going to be Red Hulk. I do think when we talk about the Red Hulk fight, I do think he was supposed to die, but I think maybe they're like, Captain America killing the president is probably a little radical, especially in today's climate. Like, I mean, obviously they couldn't predict that Trump would be a second term president. But yeah, I think Captain America, symbol of freedom and justice, killing the president is, I think, I can see why they probably changed that. So her role in the movie was also super reduced to just a small cameo. But anyways, I digress. So Sam and Bucky have this conversation, and Bucky mentions that he goes, I just want to come by, just see how you're doing, blah blah blah. He's like, I gotta go, I got a campaign to run. So that sets up him in Thunderbolts because we know in Thunderbolts he is an elected U.S. congressman. So in this, movie, he is still running for Congress, which I think is kind of cool. And I feel like that is the old school Marvel connectivity that we've been missing the last Phase 4 and most of Phase 5 because it's still a Phase 5 film. But other than that, great to see Bucky. The last like 30 minutes of the film or so, we're back in DC, like I mentioned. Ross is giving a press conference on in the White House like lawn, and at the same time, the leader shows up to Sam, who was outside the hospital, and they have a final talk where Samuel Stearns turns himself in. There's a press release that says that it basically gives a history of Samuel Stearns and how he was captive and Ross knew and Ross was controlling him and like blah 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 blah. And then this causes Ross to Hulk out and we get Red Hulk. Which again, I really like the Red Hulk stuff. I wish that it was just a little bit different. Again, I think a lot of it was just because of rewrites. I mean, I don't know exactly, but like I'm so close to knowing, if that makes sense. So yeah, so we get a really cool fight sequence between Sam and the Red Hulk, and of course a lot of people have issues with this because Sam doesn't have the super soldier serum. And they're like, oh, how can he fight a Hulk without super soldier, blah, blah, blah. Again, one, his uniform is literally made out of vibranium. His wings are made out of vibranium. The shield is made out of vibranium. If you watch that fight, and like I really paid attention to it the second time I watched it, he really uses the wings a lot. Even in those quick scenes, like they really make a point to show you that he is utilizing his wings to the point where even he acknowledges like there's a point where towards the end of the fight where his wings are like shaking because there's so much energy stored up in them from being just smacked around by Red Hulk, and they're glowing purple. And that's when he notices that he can vibranium can pierce Red Hulk skin specifically. You can't regular Hulk skin or Bruce Banner Hulk. And he stabs his wings into Ross, and that's what causes the wings to disperse that energy basically in the fight there. It explodes. And I think this is where Ross was supposed to die originally. And then like the movie would have ended with that funeral scene, and we talked about it in the trailer breakdown that I did. That I mentioned it was a military funeral, just by the way it was set up, and Ross was a general, so that would have made, and also the president, so that would have made sense. Of course, some of the supporting characters come over. They're like, "Oh crap, like you just fought the Red Hulk. That's crazy." And then like he's still alive. He gets up and he's about to eat again. And then this is the part of the fight where I think is the worst CGI so far in a Marvel film that I've seen. And I will say that with whole chest. I will say that you can tell that Sam is just superimposed onto this background. It's like they clearly shot him on a green screen. They clearly like quickly and hastily pasted him into the scene. You know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. It just looks so bad. Like in like not even like a good bad way. Like it just looks like they did this visual effect last minute, and I'm trying to understand why. I mean, we know why. We know Marvel. I mean, they've cut back a little bit because like Thunderbolts, the CGI in that movie just looks really good. So like we do know that they've acknowledged the CGI problem, and they've been working on it. You know what I mean? Man, that shot is bad. But we get to see Sam basically have his "hey, the sun's getting real low" moment, and basically talk down Ross from being Red Hulk. And I know a lot of people have issues with the scene. They're like, "Oh, how does Sam like talk?" Sam's a counselor, dog. What are you talking about? We saw it in Civil War. We saw it in Winter Soldier. We saw it in no, well, not Endgame or Infinity War, but we saw it in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He is a counselor. He is a soldier, and he knows how to talk to soldiers, and that's how he saw Ross was just another soldier. That's it. It's not that complicated. It's not that seriously. Use your brain. Come on. And the whole reason why this works is because the whole movie where Ross talks about Betty, and like we know if you watch the Incredible Hulk, which I'm assuming most people didn't, at least recently most people haven't. She mentions in that movie that she never wants to talk to him again, and that she is no longer his daughter because of what she did to Bruce and how he hunted him down, etc. But he talked about how when Betty was little, that something with DC. I think I mentioned it also in the trailer reaction that DC, they have cherry blossoms, and those are a gift from the Japanese. I don't remember when they gifted those to us, but it was sometime like it was obviously post World War II, sometime in like the 60s or 70s. But every spring they do blossom, so that is realistic. But that he would take her as a girl, and she loved the cherry blossoms. And so when he sees like the destruction of like the cherry blossoms and like some petals fall in his hand, that's what calms him down. Which, okay, sure, whatever. Not, it's whatever. But the movie ends with Ross resigning as president, which fair. We don't know who the vice president is, by the way. We just know that he is president. We don't know who any other leaders are. So we might learn that um in the Thunderbolts. But he is put on the raft. And so is the leader. So he is imprisoned on the raft with the leader. We do know that Zemo is also on the raft. And there is a quick shot where you see a guy in the background reading a book. And that's how we saw Zemo last. He had like bookshelves and stuff in his cell. So maybe he's on the same floor, the same room as Zemo. That'd be interesting. But this is where we get Betty. So we hear her voice earlier when he calls her on the phone, but we do actually see her show up and kind of like just a quick scene of her talking with Ross. And so Sam is there, and he leaves them and goes on. Earlier in the movie, I forgot to mention this, but it was in the trailer as well. At the beginning, when they go to the White House and Sam meets with meets with Ross, he's like, "I want you to reform the Avengers." So that gets brought back at the end where Joaquin is recovering from his injuries and he's alive and well. And so Sam is there on his left or on his right, I guess. Just how he was with Steve at the end of Winter Soldier. It's kind of a mirrored shot there. But he talks with Joaquin about reforming the Avengers and how Joaquin is essentially his first recruit into this new Avenger team. And there's like this running gag where he keeps bringing up Ant-Man. So I'm assuming Ant-Man and Wasp will probably be on this new team as well. But I think that's just a callback to the Ant-Man film where where Scott infiltrates the Avengers facility before it's the Avengers facility, or when it's starting to become the Avengers facility, and he fights Falcon. I think that's just a callback to that. I think it's just really funny. But that could give precedence that Scott and Janet, even though I wish they were still stuck in the quantum realm, but again, that thread's been thrown away a little bit. They'll probably be on this new Avenger team as well. We don't really know who else could be on this team. You could argue Spider-Man, but the whole thing with Sony is that we can't really have the Avengers and have Spider-Man on them, without Sony's approval. So I think Spider-Man will probably be like an interim, like Avenger character. You know what I mean? We could get Shuri. I think Shuri would be interesting. Kind of have like the Wakanda tie. We could get. I don't think we'll get any of the Fantastic Four, obviously. Maybe Daredevil, but I think they want to keep him more street level, which is fine. They can reform the Defenders. I'm okay with that. Obviously, Miss Marvel and they're kind of more young Avengers. So again, we don't know really who's going to be on this team. But I'm sure we'll find out soon. Hopefully, we'll find out soon. So let's move on to the end credit scene. There's only one end credit scene, and it's Sam visiting the leader again for some reason because he's wearing different clothes than he was in the final shot where he was in the raft. So we know he's gone there at least twice. So he's talking to the leader, and the leader gives him a cryptic message of, "Hey, look, you think your heroes, you heroes are so righteous, you think that you can protect this world." He goes, "I've seen it." He goes, "I've seen what's coming." He goes, "You think you can protect this world from the others?" And Sam kind of gives him this look like, "What are you talking about, man?" And then it cuts to black. Do you know what he's talking about? He's talking about Secret Wars, baby. Secret Wars. The others. I mean, think about it. If he has this probability thing, he probably has access to a lot of different information, okay? Especially being under Ross. I mean, statistically speaking, he could predict that the multiverse is real. Now, how he knows about the others and who these others are, yet to be determined. But I really hope that opens the door for him to actually return in Doomsday or Secret Wars. And also, I hope this is now giving Sam, as Captain America, a reason to build the Avengers in a more efficient and quicker way. Because now he has this kind of threat in the back of his mind, kind of like how Tony saw Infinity War and Endgame coming for X amount of movies. Now Sam has this idea planted, like, oh, shit's coming, and we're gonna have to fight for this world. I need my team built now. So I think this is really gonna start pushing towards, okay, look, here's the multiversal threat. We've introduced all these characters. Hey, surprise, actually, some of these shows took place in other universes. Maybe Secret Invasion took place in another universe. I don't know. I mean, Secret Invasion's a whole different discussion. I'm going to talk about it when I do my Phase 5 review ranking video, which will be after Thunderbolts comes out, because Thunderbolts is the last film of Phase 5. But Secret Invasion, I think, should have been at least a phase. But really, it should have been an entire saga. But that's a different conversation. So yeah, so we did get a tease in this movie, surprisingly, to the multiverse, which, sweet, I don't care. Let's go, baby. I'm so excited for Doomsday and Secret Wars. I mean, realistically, that's supposed to start filming. I mean, they have a little over a year to get, because that film's supposed to come out in May of next year. Unless they have all the visual effects done or they're already working on them, I don't know how they're going to get that done, because that movie is supposed to be ginormous. Not only that, they're also filming Secret Wars. Kind of like they're filming these movies back to back. So, but I guess there's more information. We'll talk about it more as more information comes out. So, I guess stick around for that. But yeah, guys, that's Captain America: Brave New World. Again, I mean, there's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about, specifically with this film, and I knew I wouldn't be able to cover it all in this video, because I don't want this episode to be super super long. I mean, it's already an hour and a half, but whatever. It's just, personally, I give it a 7 out of 10. I think it's just my bias showing a little bit, because I do love Sam as Captain America. First of all, I accept Sam as Captain America, and if you don't, you're a racist. I'm sorry. I don't make the rules. I do think this film it was just one of those films, one of those projects that was just butchered in pre-production, production, and post-production. And that's really not to the fault of the cast or the crew. A lot of that is just due to politics, not just like actual politics, but like film politics. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I hope that Thunderbolts looks really promising. I've liked what I've seen so far. We did get a new. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but we did get a newer trailer for that, where we actually got to see the void and how it just decimates people, which is terrifying. Like, it's scarier than the blip and people just dusting away. I don't know, that's just me. But anyways, guys, let me know what you thought about Captain America: Brave New World. Is it the best film ever made? Is it mid? Is it the worst Cap movie? How I would rank it, again, I will dive deeper into my rankings when I do the Phase 5 rank video. But again, personally, I'll give it, maybe I'll do 6.8 out of 10. But in terms of movie ranking, I'd probably give it a high B, I think. I mean, I do think it's, again, I had fun with it. Most people didn't. It's fine. I think I have seen a lot of positive things about it, which is refreshing when it comes to this type of media. But yeah, I rank it a high B. Anyways, guys, also let me know what you thought about your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and what other movies are you excited for this year. Next episode, we're going to be talking about the premiere of Daredevil Born Again. So if you do not want to miss that, don't forget to click that subscribe button. It really helps out the channel. Anyways, thank you for joining me for these reviews for this episode. My name is Jorvik, and I'll see you in the next one.